Living in Croatia for the last month has been an absolute whirlwind. I got to see way more in this country than I have in any other country I've been to so far. And even though I've been absolutely loving it, all good things must come to an end. I'm living in a new country every month and Croatia was just number 3. And today I'm getting into the things I enjoyed, the things I didn't, and what it means for the future of my travels. Part 1. Hospitality. When we first arrived here in Croatia, there was no noticeable difference between here and anywhere else we've been so far. People were generally friendly, but nothing to really write home about. But as time went on, we met so many different people who just wanted to chat, know where we were from, what we thought about their country, wanted to just, help us along our way. Just every daily interaction has been absolutely pleasant. People smile, they're upbeat, they're cheerful. Over the course of this last month, there's just been so many different interactions that we have that have been just truly fulfilling. We go to a cafe every single day, the exact same one, and we ended up actually having a conversation with the owner. He sat down with us, we was asking where we were from, how long we were staying, what we thought of his country, just a general friendly conversation, just wanting to know more about us and why we are there. And I'm sure he sees tourist after tourist, but the willingness to talk here is just so much greater than any place I've been. And there's little communication barrier as well, which I'll get into in a minute. On top of meeting people like him, we've just met waitresses and different locals who are more than happy to share any information you need out of them. Cost of living. The prices in this country and the overall cost of living here is just something to die for. I've absolutely been able to live a lot better simply because of cost of living. Here, the prices are just dramatically lower for just about everything. Like walking into a grocery store, you can just know that you're going to be able to afford whatever you kind of feel like without it breaking the bank. For, a budget traveler, that's critical. You need to be able to afford, food as the secondary. You want to put all your money into going to see things, going to do things. Because of these cheap prices, we were just able to go out and do a whole lot more, including like renting a car, which just didn't seem possible in previous countries. Like it just seemed way too unaffordable. It would cost us between $30 to $50 for a day, whereas here is $20. We had more money to spend when we went out. We went out to restaurants more frequently, got coffee, dinner, a lot easier here. So that was a major thing. Just being able to do a lot more for a lot less has completely changed my perspective, which I will get into more at the end of the video, how that directly changed what I'm doing in the future. Lively atmosphere. The liveliness of this country is hard to describe. You come here and whether it's first thing in the morning, late at night, people are always out and about and it always kind of feels like you're among friends. You sit at a cafe on the patio and there's tons of people there just chatting and hanging out. You feel like you're very involved in it, even as a tourist. Even without friends or other people with you, you just feel like you're a part of it all. And on top of that, people are so willing to talk and it feels like just about everybody knows each other. You always see somebody driving by and honking at somebody because they're waving and they're saying, "Hi, how you doing?" It's hard to kind of wrap your brain around how lively it is here. And there is a lot of places like that, but we just came from Germany where it's a little bit more of an insular culture, which was okay because people, they had their friends. But as a traveler, just that sheer liveliness, especially during the day and when you're out and about, really makes a big difference. Accessibility. Another major thing here is the accessibility. This is a bit of a two-parter. I'm going to get into kind of the negatives of the accessibility later on in the video. But I really love how it's so easy to get from city to islands to mountains and nature, and everything's just very close and tight, and it's a very enjoyable thing, especially as a tourist. As a tourist, you do want to see as much as possible, and it's really hard in certain places to find that connectedness between city and country and mountains and islands and all these different aspects. You just don't find that in many countries. But that's also a lot easier to talk about here in coastal Croatia. I'm sure if you went to Zagreb, it would be a bit of a different story. Cultural difference. One really fantastic thing here is the cultural difference. In the last two countries I visited, of France and Germany, there wasn't a huge cultural difference because there's a lot of German and French influence in Canada. So I didn't feel like I was really getting that culture shock, that real difference in experience. The one part of culture shock that you just really don't get, though, is the difference in language. I never struggled here whatsoever in Croatia with, communicating, which is something I do kind of desire. But here it just didn't feel like as big of a deal as it did in Germany because, there was enough other cultural differences that I didn't really need a difference in language on top of it. There's very few situations in which I'm like, I don't really know what you're saying. And the one situation that there was enough people there to help translate, and it wasn't even an issue. And nobody really sees it as a negative, to speak English here. So even though there was less of a cultural difference with the language barrier, there was still enough other cultural differences. Weather. The final thing to talk about here is the weather. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. We've only really had a couple of chilly days, but even then that's like, 8-9 degrees. I mean, I'm in a jacket right now, but I really don't need to be. I always sort of underestimate the weather here. But that's just something that I'm now kind of looking forward to in future destinations, Part 2. On to the negatives. Now, I've really enjoyed my time here in Croatia. I really didn't find a lot of negatives, but I love doing these videos every month of reflecting on my time and kind of almost giving a review on the country, or my personal review at least. It's not a, everybody's a little bit different, right? So what I find a negative, you may not. It's only so big. One major negative here is there's not a lot to do in any given place. It's only about 4 million people living in Croatia. And on top of that, every city is only so big. Split is one of the larger cities, and it's still only 160,000 people. Anywhere you really go, there's only really so much to do. And that's fine if you're staying for a few days and moving on to the next place. That makes a ton of sense. And it doesn't really matter. It wouldn't really affect you. But for me, living in a new country every month and staying in one place for a month, it was definitely a major negative. As I said, I'm talking about, kind of my negative experiences and my negative opinions, but this just wouldn't apply to most people, of course. See, as we took our road trips and kind of got outside of Split and went to other cities, we kind of kept finding ourselves showing up, and there was maybe at most 1 or 2 things to do. And that was a real struggle for us, because it just means we have to travel further and further to always find something new and exciting to do. And on top of that, like, a lot of the things to do were very, you could tell they were geared towards like a beach destination. This is very much a tourism-driven country. And so because of it being a tourism-driven country and people coming here to go and lay on a beach and relax, that's what a lot of things are geared towards. So even the things we could find to do weren't quite as, eventful as we would hope for. Accessibility. So I mentioned about the accessibility factor and how city is very connected to nature and it's very easy to get from one place to the next. But there's one major caveat to that. You do need to have access to a car. Renting a car here is extremely easy, but if you're, under the age of 25 or you're kind of on a tight budget, the gas can get kind of expensive. Car is very cheap, but the gas does kind of add up pretty quickly. And so that's a general negative, is that if you, for whatever reason, don't drive, can't drive, whatever the case may be, can't afford it, it's a lot tougher to get around the country because the public transport system here isn't fantastic. Like, even just getting on a coach bus is a lot harder than in a lot of other places in Europe. I do want to mention, though, that driving here is extremely easy. It's a lot like North America or other major European countries. It's, people drive fairly reasonably. It's very easy. But overall, it is a negative not having that easy public transportation to kind of get around, especially because a lot of people don't expect to rent a car and don't want to deal with it. So that, combined with cities being small, kind of added to almost a double negative, Touristy. It's kind of touristy here. It just is. There's a fair amount of tourism. It's a tourism-driven country. It all checks out. It all adds up. But I don't love a very touristy place. And Split, you see tour groups walking through, helps drive up prices. It's not something that I really love. And if you get kind of outside of some of the major cities, it becomes a lot less touristy and a lot more enjoyable. I think that the only real point to be made is that when a place is filled with a whole bunch of other tourists, you feel less immersed, you feel less, involved in everything, and it makes it a little bit less enjoyable. I do want to state, of course, I'm a tourist as well, but, I live in a new country every month, and I sold everything I own, and I travel for the sake of feeling immersed in a culture and kind of understanding what it's like to truly live there. And I want to also share that experience with you guys as well. And when a place is extremely touristy, it sort of takes away from all of that. That to me was a major negative. It's one thing I didn't like about Split, but again, it was not so much of an issue that I was like, oh my god, what am I doing here? Like, this sucks. It was no way like that. It was very much still an enjoyable experience, but just that touristy aspect kind of makes things fall off a little bit.
Scams.
When a place is really touristy, it also brings along scams. And that's the one thing you really have to be a little bit cautious with here. And I do want to make it clear that this is in no way a reflection on Croatia or the Croatian people. It's also not insanely common. It's just, it does happen. And I'll give you the couple of examples that I kind of had to deal with a little bit. The first real example was, if you don't look at a menu, somebody will, and you just ask for a beer, they'll kind of bring you the most expensive one, or definitely not the cheapest one, not the most common one. We learned that lesson very quickly, that we ended up paying a little bit more simply because we just asked for a beer rather than, asking specifically for what we wanted. The next thing that happened to us was that there was a couple of people that would act like they didn't quite understand us or misheard us or whatever, and come and bring us another drink or something of the sort and try to get us to pay for it. It didn't happen often, but it did happen once or twice that it's something to take note on. Finally, and the most common things, people will just straight up overcharge you. This happened time and time again, whereas people would, kind of sneak in, like a waiter would sneak in an extra $1 and say, oh, the menu changed, or no, you got another drink, or no, you didn't order that, you ordered this. This was a very common situation, especially at the markets and that. They would just pick a price if there wasn't a price tag on it and charge you that much. And to give you an example, I spent €4 on a little thing of strawberries. It was insane. This was something that did happen often enough that I did feel the need to include it. But again, it's not extremely common. And if you say, thank you in Croatian, vala, and you use another couple of proper pronunciations, the rate of it happening drops dramatically. People just don't assume you're a tourist as much, or if they do, they realize that you're experienced and you're not going to kind of fall for it. So again, this wasn't running rampant. It wasn't a absolutely terrible thing about my experience here. It was just enough that I did have to state it and kind of point out that it wasn't the most enjoyable thing to have to contend with.
Part 3.
So I'm only going to touch on how this changed my future plans very briefly here. And I don't normally do this, but I'm going to tell you my next destination, and that's Albania. This was a decision we made a week ago, and we canceled going to Scotland and instead decided on Albania because of a lot of the things that we experience here in Croatia. So there's two main factors that kind of led us to this decision. The first one was cost of living. The second one was the weather. See, to go to Scotland and go back to the cost of living that we experienced in France, if not higher, was just not something that we wanted to deal with. We just had way less fun in France and Germany because we could just afford way less. And so we made the decision to switch our flights, switch everything, and luckily we were able to do that without it costing us any extra money. And we booked going to Albania. We decided to go to Albania because it's a cheaper country and it's also warmer. We've had a lot more fun here too because it's easier to get outside. You're more willing to get out and go do stuff when it's warmer. It just is. So sticking to a warm place, you know, is actually probably going to be a priority of ours from now on. I guess there's another reason too, is a bit of the cultural difference thing. We just felt like we've really opened up our kind of traveling wings here, for lack of a better way of saying it. And we want to continue to have kind of some different experiences. And Albania is a country not a lot of people go to, and it's a country now we want to explore. I know there's a lot of ands. I keep kind of adding things here because now it's just kind of clicking in my mind. The other thing was as well is that our time in the EU is up. We can only stay 90 days in the EU before we have to leave. And so we couldn't pick another EU country. And Albania is one of the few that isn't in the EU, or more specifically, I should say, the Schengen zone. You can't stay in the Schengen for longer than 90 days unless you get a visa and go through all that, which we have no intention of really doing any of that. We don't want to deal with visas and all this kind of stuff. And we want to just keep exploring new countries anyway, so might as well cross it off the list, right? So guys, that's what I learned here in Croatia, what I learned about Croatian culture, what I learned about myself. I do one of these videos at the end of every month, along with my living in a new country every month, which is my introduction to a country, talking about why we decided on it, all that kind of stuff. If you guys want to see any of those videos, consider subscribing. Hit the notification button too, so that way you can know when I post, because I kind of post as I can. I try to do twice a week. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, commenting what you thought about these things, if you've been to Croatia, what you thought about the country. But until next time, we'll see ya.